11 recent ancient discoveries that even scientists can't explain. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Ancient History channel. My friends, if you've ever thought that history simply sits quietly within the pages of old dusty books, you might change your mind after hearing the stories that archaeology has uncovered in recent years. The deeper humans dig into the earth, the more astonishing discoveries they continue to reveal, findings that leave the entire world in awe. From tiny artifacts that have been buried for thousands of years to hidden treasures that once lay silently in the shadows of history, these discoveries are slowly coming to light. Each one opens a new door that allows us to better understand the lives of our ancestors. Every archaeological discovery is like a piece of a vast puzzle from the past, and when those pieces are placed together, they don't just retell ancient stories, they often force us to rethink and even rewrite what we once believed to be true. There are ancient tombs that remained forgotten for centuries, lost cities buried deep beneath the ground or hidden under the ocean, and even mysterious human remains and perfectly preserved mummies that humanity had never known existed before. So, are you curious about what stories might still be hidden beneath the soil? And could these discoveries change the way we understand history and the world itself? If the answer is yes, then right now, come along with me as we explore some of the most fascinating and remarkable discoveries together. The 1,350-year-old Ice Child tomb reveals a truth that chilled archaeologists. In the quiet village of Matzes, a place that once stood at the crossroads of several ancient European cultures, archaeologists were carefully digging through thick layers of soil tangled with old tree roots when they suddenly struck something unusually hard. At first, only a few stone slabs appeared, but the deeper they dug, the more they realized this was no ordinary structure. Gradually, an ancient stone tomb emerged before their eyes, built so solidly that even after lying underground for more than 1,350 years, it remained almost perfectly intact. And when the lid of the tomb was finally opened, the scene inside caused everyone present to fall silent for several seconds. Lying in the center of the tomb was the body of a small child. Based on dental analysis and bone structure, researchers determined that the child was only about 18 months old. But what astonished the research team was not only the age of the burial, it was the objects placed beside the child. Right next to the small body was a sword decorated with delicate gold inlays, something that in ancient societies was usually reserved for warriors or members of the highest noble class. Doesn't that seem strange? A child not even 2 years old yet buried with a symbol of power and honor. The child's body had been carefully laid on a piece of animal fur. The small figure was wrapped in a cloak and adorned with several items that suggested high social status. The clothing itself puzzled scientists for a long time. The child was dressed in a long-sleeved linen tunic, trousers, and leather shoes. And most remarkable of all, the trim of the garment was woven with silk, an extremely rare and valuable fabric at that time. What makes this detail even more fascinating is that the silk was not produced locally. Instead, it likely arrived through long-distance trade routes connected to the ancient Byzantine Empire. This strongly suggests that the child's family held significant wealth and influence within their society. Yet the mystery deepened even further when experts began analyzing the tomb itself. This was not a simple burial pit. The tomb had been constructed with thick stone walls, precisely shaped stone slabs, and the entire structure had been sealed with a strong layer of lime mortar. In other words, it resembled a structure specifically designed to resist the destruction of time, and remarkably, it succeeded. After more than a millennium, nearly everything inside had been preserved in astonishing condition. Thanks in part to the cold climate of Central Europe, materials that normally decay quickly, such as textile fibers, animal fur, and even some organic tissues, had survived. Because of this rare preservation, archaeologists were able to observe almost the entire burial arrangement exactly as it had been prepared more than 1,000 years ago, something that rarely happens with ancient graves. But the more details researchers uncovered, the more questions began to appear. Why would a child be buried with a gold-adorned sword, a clear symbol of a warrior? Could this have been a symbolic coming-of-age ritual, honoring the child as an heir who never lived long enough to grow up? Or perhaps it was a tragic death that led the family to hold a special ceremony to honor the child's memory. It might even represent a unique way in which ancient society commemorated a young member of a royal lineage. Perhaps the most puzzling aspect for researchers is how completely different this tomb is compared to other burials from the same era. Most medieval children's graves were simple and modest. Yet this tomb was constructed with the care and complexity normally reserved for someone extremely important. So who was this mysterious ice child? A young prince? The heir to a powerful family? Or the central figure of an ancient ritual that history has long since forgotten? If you had been standing in front of that tomb on the day it was opened, what do you think was really hidden behind that golden sword lying beside a child only 18 months old? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below so we can discuss it together. The mysterious 6,000-year-old tunnel beneath a moat in Germany. Did you know that some archaeological discoveries begin with the most ordinary projects? Not with a grand expedition and not with a hunt for ancient treasure. Sometimes everything starts with a modern construction site. And this strange story is no different. When engineers were preparing to build a wind turbine in the region of Rheinstedt, they had no idea that beneath the seemingly ordinary soil lay a secret that had been hidden for thousands of years. The story began during the preliminary surveys before construction. At that time, archaeologists from the State Office for Heritage Management and Archaeology of Saxony-Anhalt were called to the site to conduct an emergency excavation. At first, they assumed it would be a routine inspection like many others. But as soon as the first layer of soil was removed, the specialists began noticing unusual signs. Beneath the ground appeared the remains of an ancient trapezoid-shaped moat, carefully dug and built with a surprisingly complex structure. As the excavation continued deeper, archaeologists realized that this structure dated back to an extremely distant past. Initial analysis suggested that it was connected to the Balberga culture, a society from the late Neolithic period that existed in central Germany between 4000 and 3150 BC. That means the site dates back nearly 6,000 years. That number alone is enough to spark the curiosity of anyone who loves history. But the most surprising discovery had not yet appeared. While continuing to examine the bottom of the moat, experts discovered a small opening that led downward into the earth. At first, it looked like a natural cavity in the soil. However, once it was carefully cleared, the team realized that it was actually the entrance to an ancient tunnel. The entrance was narrow and discreet, almost completely hidden. Yet as researchers moved deeper inside, the space gradually widened, revealing that this was not a random formation. Just imagine it for a moment. Thousands of years ago, in the middle of a moated area, prehistoric people secretly dug a tunnel like this. But for what purpose? At first, even the archaeologists themselves had no clear answer. However, when they began examining what remained inside the tunnel, the ancient story slowly started to take shape. Inside, the experts discovered an ancient altar, several fragments of pottery, a horseshoe, along with the skeleton of a fox and bones from several other small mammals. At the bottom of the tunnel, they also found a layer of charcoal, evidence that fires had once been lit there. These findings led researchers to propose several different theories. Some experts believe the tunnel may have been a place for secret ritual ceremonies, where ancient people offered sacrifices to the spiritual forces they worshipped. The animal bones in the altar could be remnants of ancient sacrificial rituals. Others suggest a different possibility. The tunnel might once have been used as a place to store important belongings, or even as a safe shelter during times of conflict between ancient communities. With its narrow entrance and its location within a moat, the structure may have been designed to conceal people from outside threats. For now, however, these ideas remain only theories. One thing is certain: this tunnel was not created by chance. It was the result of human intelligence and effort thousands of years ago. So think about it for a moment. If you had lived during that time, how would you have used a secret tunnel hidden deep beneath a moat? Would it have been a sacred place for ancient rituals, or a final refuge when danger arrived? Personally, I think it may have been some kind of shelter. But the real answer may still lie somewhere beneath the ancient soil of Rheinstedt, patiently waiting to be discovered one day. Ancient ritual ceramic jar in Ciudad Telco reveals a lost mystery from 1,400 years ago. In the mountainous region of the Sierra Nororiental, within the Mexican state of Puebla, there is an archaeological site with a rather unusual name, Ciudad Telco. At first glance, the place appears to be nothing more than a quiet stretch of land covered with vegetation and the subtle marks of time. Yet few people realize that beneath this seemingly ordinary soil lie stories from an ancient era, long before Europeans ever set foot in the Americas. Recently, a small but remarkable discovery has drawn the attention of archaeologists. During an excavation carried out by the National Institute of Anthropology and History, researchers uncovered an important pre-Columbian archaeological feature at Xuchitelco. As the soil was carefully removed layer by layer, traces of ancient structures slowly began to appear. Then, among fragments of pottery and architectural remains, a special artifact gradually emerged. It was a spherical ceramic jar, small enough to be comfortably held in two hands, with a diameter of about 12 inches. At first glance, it might seem like just another ordinary piece of ancient pottery, but the more closely experts examined it, the more they realized this vessel was far from simple. Its evenly rounded shape and finely crafted body suggest that it was made by highly skilled potters of the ancient world. According to initial analyses, the jar dates back to the late Classic period of Mesoamerica, roughly between AD 600 and AD 900. In other words, this small artifact has existed for more than 1,400 years, a span of time almost impossible to imagine. However, what interested archaeologists the most was not the jar's age, but its possible purpose. According to a statement from the National Institute of Anthropology and History, ceramic vessels with similar shapes were often used in ancient funeral rituals. In many pre-Columbian cultures, such jars were sometimes associated with the burial of infants. This possibility immediately raised several questions for researchers. Could this jar have once been used in a burial ceremony? And if so, what story lies behind it? Interestingly, the vessel was not discovered alone. It was found very close to the architectural remains of a large platform, which may once have served as the center of an ancient ceremonial complex. This discovery suggests that Xuchitelco may have been an important ritual site in the region during ancient times. Unfortunately, the jar itself is now in a very fragile condition. After centuries buried underground, it is cracked and broken into many small fragments. Because of this, archaeologists had to use an extremely careful method during the excavation. Instead of separating the fragments at the site, they decided to remove the entire artifact together with the surrounding block of soil. This technique helps protect the fragile ceramic pieces from further damage during transportation. Once removed from the excavation area, the soil block containing the jar will be transported to the Xuchitelco Community Museum. There, specialists will conduct detailed studies, including reconstructing the jar's original shape and analyzing the materials used to create it. These investigations may help scientists better understand how ancient people in this region performed their ritual ceremonies, as well as the true role that Xuchitelco played within the broader pre-Columbian cultural landscape. Hopefully, in the near future, archaeologists will be able to piece together all the newly discovered fragments and continue telling a story that history has kept hidden for more than 1,400 years. Until then, let's wait together and see what secrets the past may reveal next. The tomb with gold nails in the coffin, an accidental discovery reveals a historical general. Some archaeological discoveries begin with carefully planned excavations, but other stories start completely by accident, sometimes with just a few strikes of a worker's shovel. And it was exactly such a moment that led to the discovery of an ancient treasure-filled tomb, where even the nails used in the coffin were made of solid gold, a detail so rare that it left archaeologists stunned. The story began when a reservoir construction project was underway in Xinpu County, located in Guizhou. At first, this was simply a routine water management project. Day after day, workers continued digging and leveling the ground just as they would at any other construction site. But during the excavation, they suddenly noticed signs of an unusual structure buried beneath the thick soil, something that resembled an ancient tomb. Sensing that the discovery might be important, the workers quickly reported it to the local authorities. Soon after, archaeologists arrived at the site to conduct a proper investigation. To be honest, at the early stage, the experts did not have particularly high expectations. Small ancient graves are often discovered during construction projects, and many of them turn out to have limited archaeological value. However, those initial assumptions were soon overturned. As the excavation continued and layers of soil were gradually removed, the team discovered a coffin buried deep underground. Once the surrounding dirt had been carefully cleared away, the archaeologists began examining it more closely. Most of the wood from the coffin had already decayed after centuries underground. But at that moment, a surprising detail caught everyone's attention. On the surface of the coffin, the nails were still intact, and they were not made of iron or bronze as usually expected. Each one shimmered with a golden glow. Yes, the nails were made of pure gold. In ancient times, gold was an extremely valuable metal. It was typically used for jewelry, royal items, or ritual objects. Yet here, gold had been used simply to fasten a coffin together. This seemingly small detail immediately told archaeologists something important. The person buried in this tomb could not have been an ordinary individual. As the excavation continued deeper, the discoveries became even more astonishing. Throughout the burial chamber, numerous valuable artifacts slowly emerged from the soil. Gold objects, silver items, jade pieces scattered throughout the space. Among them, one of the most striking objects was a gilded silver basin intricately engraved with the image of two fish. The basin measured more than 24 inches in diameter, an exceptionally large size for an ancient artifact. And that was not all. Once the full structure of the tomb had been uncovered, experts realized that its scale was far larger than they had originally expected. The burial chamber was spacious, and the grave goods were so numerous that they nearly filled the entire interior. Every artifact was finely crafted and incredibly valuable, clearly indicating the extremely high status of the person buried there. But the most important clue was yet to come. Among the many treasures discovered, archaeologists found a silver lampstand that stood out from the rest. Unlike the other items, this one had inscriptions carved into its surface. Those words would eventually become the key to solving the mystery of the tomb. After careful study and comparison with historical records, experts were finally able to determine the identity of the tomb's owner. The person buried inside was Yang Jia, a well-known general in history who once commanded troops along the frontier and achieved numerous victories in battles against the Mongols. Because of his remarkable military achievements, he was highly respected by the emperor during his lifetime and received many honors. And when he passed away, he was laid to rest in a luxurious tomb that reflected both his rank and his reputation. It's fascinating to think that from a completely accidental discovery by construction workers digging in the ground, an entire historical story from centuries ago was brought back into the light. An ancient tomb glittering golden nails, and behind it all, the legacy of a general who once shaped history along the frontier. Quite an incredible story, isn't it? The skeletons of children, wearing warrior belts in a 2,500-year-old cemetery in Italy. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than an old construction site, a place that had once been an abandoned tobacco factory. Everything seemed ordinary: dirt and rocks, aging brick walls, and layers of dust left behind by time. But deep beneath that ground lay a story from nearly 2,500 years ago. And no, this isn't a tale from a science fiction movie. It is a real story, one that left archaeologists thinking for a long time before they could begin to understand its meaning. The story begins in the town of Pontecagnano, located in the Campania region of southwestern Italy. During a recent archaeological excavation at the site of the old tobacco factory, researchers uncovered an ancient cemetery buried deep underground. Among dozens of graves that were excavated, one in particular immediately caught everyone's attention. Inside that grave were the skeletal remains of two children between the ages of 5 and 10. According to experts, they were buried nearly 2,500 years ago, around the 4th century BC. However, what fascinated researchers the most was not simply the children's age, but the objects buried with them. Among the grave goods were large bronze belts. At first, that may not sound especially unusual, but for archaeologists, this detail was extremely surprising. These belts are typically found only in the graves of adult men belonging to the pre-Roman Samnite culture, usually individuals of high status or members of the warrior class. So why would two small children be buried with items normally associated with grown men? That question immediately prompted experts to take a closer look at the entire cemetery. As it turned out, the grave of the two children was only part of a much larger burial site containing 34 tombs, dating from the 4th to the 3rd century BC. What surprised researchers even more was that nearly half of the graves contained the remains of children between the ages of 2 and 10. In fact, archaeological excavations in Pontecagnano actually began back in the early 1960s. Over decades of research, archaeologists have discovered more than 10,000 graves spread across 3 separate ancient cemeteries in the area. These burial grounds date from the 9th century BC to the 3rd century BC, representing hundreds of years of history hidden beneath the soil. According to researchers, this region was first settled by people of the Villanovan culture around the 9th century BC. They were known for introducing highly advanced bronze working techniques to southern Italy, which explains why so many of the metal artifacts discovered here are so finely crafted. Returning to the unusual grave of the 2 children, archaeologists soon realized that this was not the first time they had encountered children buried with bronze belts in this region. Previously, they had uncovered the remains of a 12-year-old child who had also been buried with a similar belt. Archaeologist Gina Tomei told the press in 2021 that this discovery was extremely significant. According to her, the 12-year-old boy lived around the 4th century BC, and besides the bronze belt, he was also buried with ceramic drinking cups. These items may have been placed in the grave to ensure that the child would have food and wine in the afterlife, a belief commonly found in many ancient cultures. Yet the biggest question still remains unanswered. Why were these children buried with belts meant for adults? Some researchers have proposed an interesting theory. They compared these burials with graves from Anglo-Saxon culture in the United Kingdom during the 6th century. In many of those cases, young boys were buried with belts and warrior equipment, even though they were far too young to fight. The meaning behind this ritual may not have been about the child's past, but about their future. Perhaps these objects symbolized what the child was meant to become if they had grown up. A warrior, a protector of the community. At least that's what I think. But what about you? What do you think? 42 mysterious skeletons discovered beneath a 500-year-old hospital in Peru. Right in the heart of the historic capital city of Lima, there stands a building that has existed for nearly half a millennium. People walk past it every day and probably see it as nothing more than an old historic structure. But few realize that beneath the ground below this site lies a secret that has drawn the special attention of archaeologists. That secret was revealed during an excavation at Hospital San Andres. Here, researchers discovered an ancient cemetery buried deep underground. What surprised them the most was that within a relatively small area, they uncovered 42 skeletons dating back to the 16th century. Just hearing that number alone is enough to spark curiosity, isn't it? In fact, Hospital San Andres is far from an ordinary place. It is one of the oldest buildings in Lima, constructed in 1552 during the time of Andrés Hurtado de Mendoza, who served as a representative of Spanish colonial authority in the region. Over the centuries, the hospital has witnessed countless events in the city, from epidemics and wars to the many social changes of an entire era. Yet even the people who originally built the hospital likely never imagined that one day the soil beneath it would reveal such a large ancient cemetery. According to the lead archaeologist Luis Martín Bogdanovich, the newly discovered site may actually be the oldest and best preserved cemetery ever found in Lima. Initial records suggest that this burial ground was used continuously from 1552 until 1808, meaning it remained active for more than 250 years. As archaeologists carefully removed layer after layer of soil, the skeletons gradually appeared. In total, 42 sets of human remains were uncovered, buried only about 12 inches below the surface. What is particularly remarkable is that many of the skeletons remain surprisingly well preserved, despite having been underground for centuries. Preliminary analysis indicates that the individuals buried here included both men and women, most of whom died between the ages of 30 and 50. Some of the male skeletons even show evidence of diseases that once affected people during that historical period, including syphilis, as well as certain cranial deformities. These details provide researchers with valuable insights into the health conditions and living standards of people during the Spanish colonial period. But the story does not end there. Alongside the skeletons, the archaeological team also discovered various ancient artifacts scattered throughout the burial area. These included small crosses, ceramic vessels, and several objects associated with the religious and cultural traditions of that time. Such items suggest that this cemetery was not used by only one group of people. Instead, it may have served as the final resting place for individuals from different social classes, from ordinary citizens to people of higher status. And this discovery has led archaeologists to an extremely intriguing hypothesis. Some experts believe the cemetery might somehow be connected to the burial place of the final rulers of the Inca Empire. After the Spanish conquest of the region in the 16th century, historical records indicate that the mummies of several Inca kings were moved or hidden in secret locations. To this day, the true resting places of some Inca rulers remain unknown. Because of that, the discovery of 42 skeletons beneath this ancient hospital has generated enormous excitement within the archaeological community. If this hypothesis turns out to be correct, it is possible that somewhere within this ancient cemetery there are still undiscovered graves, and perhaps one of them could even belong to the rulers of an empire that once dominated the entire Andes Mountains. For this reason, scientists are now planning to continue excavating deeper in the area. Who knows? During the next round of digging, they might not only uncover a few more skeletons, but also reveal a missing piece of history from a legendary empire that has been lost for centuries. And if that happens, wouldn't that be incredible? For now, let's wait and see what the next discoveries will reveal. The remains of a child inside a 3,800-year-old jar in Israel. Some archaeological discoveries astonish people because of gold, silver, and precious treasures, but others leave people quietly reflecting because of the deeply human story behind them. The discovery in the ancient city of Jaffa in Israel is one such story. During a recent archaeological excavation, researchers uncovered an ancient ceramic jar buried deep beneath the ground. At first glance, it did not look very different from many other ancient jars that have been found at archaeological sites. However, when experts carefully opened the jar, what they saw inside caused everyone to freeze in shock. Inside the jar were the skeletal remains of a child. What makes this discovery even more remarkable is the age of the jar itself. Archaeologists estimate that it is about 3,800 years old, meaning it dates back to a very distant period in history, when many ancient civilizations in the Middle East were still in their early stages of development. According to researchers, Jaffa is one of the oldest cities in the region. People have lived there continuously for around 4,000 years. Over the course of thousands of years, this area served as an important trading hub where different cultures met and left their marks. Because of this, nearly every time archaeologists dig into the ground beneath the city, they uncover new traces of history. One of the archaeologists directly involved in the discovery of this unusual jar was Yoav Arbel from the Israel Antiquities Authority. According to him, finding the remains of a child inside a jar like this is not something commonly encountered in archaeology. What puzzles scientists the most is why ancient people chose to bury the child in such a unique way. Think about it for a moment. Why not place the child in a regular grave, but instead inside a ceramic jar? To answer that question, researchers have proposed an interesting hypothesis. Some scientists believe that ancient people may have viewed the bodies of young children as extremely fragile and vulnerable. Because of this, they might have wanted to protect the child after death, shielding the body from the pressure of soil and the surrounding environment. And the ceramic jar itself may have carried a deeper symbolic meaning. According to Yoav Arbel, ancient people may have seen the jar as a symbol of the mother's womb. By placing the child inside the jar and burying it in the ground, they might have believed that the child was still being protected and embraced, just as it once was inside the mother's body. In other words, this burial practice may have been a way for ancient people to express love and protection for a small life that had left the world far too soon. Of course, this is still only a scientific hypothesis. Researchers say they need more time and additional evidence to fully understand why this unusual burial ritual existed. However, what is certain is that this discovery offers a fascinating new perspective on how ancient people faced death, especially the death of children. Before the jar containing the child's remains was discovered, archaeologists in Jaffa had already uncovered many other remarkable artifacts. In ancient burial pits, they found ceramic fragments dating back more than 2,000 years, along with dozens of ancient coins from the Hellenistic period. These small objects may seem insignificant, but they are actually crucial clues that help scientists reconstruct how people lived thousands of years ago, how they traded, how they organized their daily lives, and even how they honored those who had passed away. And as you can see, sometimes a single small ceramic jar lying quietly beneath the ground for nearly 4 millennia is enough to tell a long story about history, culture, and the emotions of people who lived in the ancient world. Isn't that fascinating? 115 16th century skeletons with coins in their mouths found beneath a highway. You know, sometimes history isn't just written in books. Sometimes it lies right beneath our feet, waiting quietly for centuries. All it takes is a construction machine digging through a few layers of soil, and suddenly a story from hundreds of years ago emerges into the light. And that is exactly what happened in the Podkarpacki voivodeship of Poland, where a modern transportation project unexpectedly uncovered an ancient secret. The discovery occurred while workers were constructing the S19 expressway near the village of Jeżowy in the town of Nisko, Poland. During the construction work, the crew suddenly noticed unusual signs beneath the soil. At first, it was only a few fragments of bone appearing among the dirt and rocks, but the deeper they dug, the clearer it became that this was not an ordinary find. Construction was immediately halted, and archaeologists were called to the site. As the excavation began, skeleton after skeleton slowly emerged from the ground. By the time the dig was completed, the final number surprised everyone: 115 skeletons buried beneath the earth. Yet what caught the experts' attention the most was not only the large number of remains. According to the initial survey, about 70 to 80% of the skeletons belonged to children. A cemetery where most of the buried individuals were children, this detail alone gave many researchers pause. It raised the possibility that the community may have experienced a major epidemic or some tragic event that caused many young lives to be lost during the same period. Based on the condition of the bones and the burial layers in the soil, experts determined that the remains date back to the 16th century, roughly 500 years ago. However, when archaeologists examined the skeletons more closely, they discovered an even more unusual detail. Inside the mouths of some of the skeletons, ancient coins had been placed. Imagine the scene for a moment. An old cemetery, skeletons resting silently for centuries, and inside their mouths, small coins still remain. Why would ancient people do such a thing? Archaeologists say this was not random at all. In fact, it relates to a very old burial tradition in European history known as the obol of the dead. According to this ancient custom, before a person was buried, family members would place a coin inside the deceased's mouth. This coin was often called Charon's obol. The tradition originated from Charon in Greek mythology. In the legend, the souls of the dead must cross a river in order to enter the afterlife. The ferryman who carries them across that river is Charon, the boatman of the underworld. But in order to cross, the soul must pay a fee. Because of this belief, the living placed a coin in the mouth of the deceased as payment, so the soul could give it to Charon and continue its journey to the next world. Interestingly, this custom dates back to pre-Christian times, yet it survived for centuries within European culture. In fact, records show that the practice was still observed in some places as late as the 19th century during the time of Pope Pius IX. Returning to the ancient cemetery in Podkarpacki voivodeship, archaeologists noticed something else important. The individuals buried there had not simply been thrown into a chaotic mass grave. Instead, they had been carefully buried. All of the skeletons were laid on their backs, with their arms resting straight along their sides, a fairly formal and respectful burial position. However, aside from the coins placed in the mouths of some individuals, archaeologists did not find any other grave goods. There were no pieces of jewelry, no personal belongings, and no signs of wealth. Because of this, experts believe that the people buried in this cemetery may have belonged to the poorer social classes of that time. Two male skeletons holding hands for 1,600 years in an ancient tomb in Italy. In 2009, during an archaeological excavation in Italy, experts discovered a particularly unusual ancient grave. At first, they assumed it was just another routine archaeological find, similar to many other ancient tombs uncovered over the years. However, when the final layer of soil was cleared away, the scene that appeared before them caused everyone at the site to pause in silence for several seconds. Inside the grave were two skeletons lying side by side. What surprised everyone most was that their hands were tightly clasped together. At first glance, this position brought to mind the familiar image of married couples or lovers buried together in many ancient graves discovered around the world. But the story quickly became far more mysterious as researchers began studying the two skeletons more closely. Because of the burial conditions and the long passage of time, the preservation of both skeletons was quite poor. Many bones had been severely damaged, making it extremely difficult at first to determine their identity and gender. Archaeologists had to conduct a wide range of analyses, from examining bone structures and studying skeletal morphology to performing more complex scientific tests. The investigation took several years because even a small mistake could lead to an incorrect conclusion. Finally, after a careful and lengthy research process, the results were announced. Both skeletons belonged to men who lived around the 4th century AD. This finding immediately attracted special attention from the archaeological community. Until then, discovering 2 male skeletons buried while holding hands was something that had almost never been recorded in archaeological history. Naturally, this made the story of the ancient tomb even more mysterious. So who were these 2 men? And why were they buried in such an intimate position? To this day, there is still no definitive answer. Some experts have proposed a fairly reasonable hypothesis. The 2 men may have been brothers or cousins within the same family. In many ancient cultures, burying relatives beside one another was not unusual. Another theory suggests that they might have been soldiers who fought and died together on the battlefield. If that were the case, burying them side by side and even positioning their hands together could have been a way for people of that time to honor their camaraderie and deep bond. There is also a more controversial theory that has sparked considerable debate. Some researchers believe the 2 men may have been a same-sex couple in ancient society and that they were buried in a way that reflected their special relationship. Regardless of which theory might be correct, the discovery continues to make many people reflect. Because sometimes, a small detail, like 2 hands still clasped together after thousands of years, is enough to tell a story that history itself has forgotten. Around 1,600 years ago, these 2 individuals were laid to rest in the same grave, their hands still holding each other, as if trying to send a message to the future. Sadly, time has carried away almost all the answers, and that is exactly what makes this story so fascinating. Because in archaeology, what remains is not only bones or artifacts, but also the mysteries that continue to inspire modern people to search for the truth. 1,000-year-old banquet inside a tomb, a meal prepared for the afterlife. Since ancient times, building a tomb was never a careless task for ancient people. To them, death was not the end, but simply a doorway to another world. Because of this belief, the arrangement of objects inside a tomb was always prepared with great care. People in the past believed that whatever was placed beside them in death would accompany them into the afterlife. For that reason, many high-ranking officials and members of the aristocracy were often buried with numerous grave goods, from jewelry, pottery, and weapons to everyday household items. Some individuals even prepared a complete meal for themselves after death. It may sound unbelievable, but that is exactly what archaeologists witnessed when they excavated a famous ancient tomb in Zhangjiakou, located in Hebei province of China. The tomb is believed to be the final resting place of a historical figure named Zheng Wenxi. The moment the ancient tomb door was opened, after being buried underground for thousands of years, the archaeologists could hardly believe what they were seeing. Right before them, within the quiet space of the tomb, appeared a very unusual sight that looked exactly like a banquet table. This was not an imaginary scene, but an actual dining setup carefully arranged. On the table were bowls and plates neatly placed, almost as if their owner had stepped away only a short time ago. What surprised the experts even more was that wine bottles were placed beside the dishes. Of course, after thousands of years, the wine inside had completely evaporated, leaving only the empty bottles behind. Yet the fact that the bottles were still positioned exactly where they had been placed told archaeologists that this arrangement was far from random. But the story did not end there. As researchers examined the ancient banquet area more closely, they discovered several additional fascinating artifacts. Among them was a beautiful white porcelain plate, delicately decorated with elegant black branch-like patterns. What caught everyone's attention was that a few raisins were still resting on the plate. Yes, those raisins had remained inside the tomb for thousands of years. Just imagining the scene is remarkable enough. An ancient banquet table with dishes, wine, and fruit lying quietly underground for millennia, almost as if it were still waiting for someone to return and enjoy the meal. For archaeologists, this discovery is not simply an intriguing sight. It also carries significant scientific value. Through the objects found on this banquet table, scientists have gained valuable information about the history of grape cultivation and winemaking in ancient society. Furthermore, the way the table was arranged reflects the beliefs and mindset of people in that era. It is very possible that Zhang Wenci prepared this meal with the hope that, after entering the next world, he could continue to enjoy life in his own way. This reveals an interesting philosophy of life among ancient people. They did not necessarily view death with fear, but rather as the beginning of a new journey. Because the tomb was prepared with such careful attention to detail, modern researchers are now able to better understand the lives, culture, and beliefs of people who lived thousands of years ago. From the bowls and plates to the few raisins that remained behind, every item has become a precious piece of the historical puzzle. And that is exactly what makes archaeology so fascinating. Every new discovery is like a doorway opening into the past, helping us better understand the people, cultures, and daily lives of our ancestors who lived thousands of years ago. Ancient tombs, forgotten cities, and mysterious artifacts are quietly telling the stories of history. And who knows? Right now, there may still be countless secrets buried deep beneath the ground, waiting for humanity to uncover them. So, which archaeological discovery makes you the most curious? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to give ancient history a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next fascinating discoveries. For now, goodbye and see you in the next video.